Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Tonight we're going deep into the shadows of Gotham City, but not the Gotham you think you know. We're exploring the Batman stories that DC Comics published, stories that are real, stories that exist in the official canon, but stories that rarely see the light of day. These aren't your typical Joker schemes or Riddler puzzles. These are the cases that kept Batman awake for weeks. The ones that made him question everything. The ones so psychologically disturbing that they've been overshadowed by more popular storylines, quietly sitting in comic book archives, waiting to be rediscovered. I'm talking about the time Batman was captured, drugged and brainwashed for weeks in underground sewers, forced to watch himself commit murders while his mind screamed but his body obeyed. I'm talking about the victims who were surgically altered, their minds destroyed, turned into living dolls who could never be saved. I'm talking about the serial killer with over 300 tally marks carved into his own flesh, one for each person he liberated from what he called the prison of existence. These stories are real, they're published, they're canon, and tonight, you're going to hear them. But before we descend into Gotham's darkest corners together, do me a favor, hit that like button if you're ready for this journey. Subscribe if you want more deep dives into the stories that most people overlook, and drop a comment telling me where in the world you're listening from right now. I love seeing our community spread across every time zone, all gathering here for these stories. Now, I want you to get comfortable, maybe dim your lights, adjust your pillows, find that perfect position, because once we begin, we're going to walk through shadows that even the Dark Knight struggled to face. Let me take you back to 1988, a year that changed Batman forever. Picture this: Gotham City, drowning in crime as always, but something new is stirring in the sewers beneath the streets. People are vanishing, not the usual Gotham disappearances. These are different, homeless people, dozens of them, gone without a trace. The police don't care, they never do when it's the forgotten ones. But Batman cares. He goes down into those tunnels, following whispers of a man called Deacon Blackfire. A preacher, they say. A holy man who offers salvation to those the city abandoned. Batman expects a con artist, maybe a petty crime lord using religion as a cover. What he finds instead is something that will break him in ways no villain ever has. Because 4 weeks later, Robin has to descend into those same sewers, and what he finds is Batman, his mentor, his hero, chained in darkness, his mind shattered, his eyes hollow, speaking in tongues about salvation and blood. Batman, the indomitable Dark Knight, reduced to a mumbling shell, his body covered in ritualistic scars, his hands stained with blood that isn't his. And the worst part? Batman remembers everything, every moment. Every act he was forced to commit while his mind screamed from behind a wall of drugs and psychological torture. This is a real story. Published by DC Comics in 1988, it's called The Cult, and it's one of the most disturbing Batman stories ever put to print, and it's just the beginning of tonight's journey. So take a deep breath, settle in, and let's explore the cases that Gotham tried to forget. Let's begin. To understand these stories, you need to understand when they happened. The late 1980s and 1990s were a transformational time for Batman comics. In 1986, DC Comics had just rebooted their entire universe in an event called Crisis on Infinite Earths. Everything started fresh. And with that fresh start came a question: who is Batman, really? The answer they found was darker than anyone expected. Writers like Frank Miller, Grant Morrison, Jim Starlin, and Jeff Loeb began exploring Batman not as a simple superhero, but as a deeply traumatized man, fighting a war he could never truly win. They asked uncomfortable questions. Is Batman sane? Does he create his own villains? What's the psychological cost of witnessing horror night after night, year after year? These weren't comics for children anymore. These were psychological horror stories dressed in capes and cowls. This era gave us The Killing Joke, where Joker paralyzes Barbara Gordon, and pushes Commissioner Gordon to the brink of madness. It gave us A Death in the Family, where Jason Todd, the second Robin, is beaten to death with a crowbar. It gave us Arkham Asylum, a serious house on serious earth, a nightmarish journey through madness itself. But those stories became famous. Everyone knows them. They've been adapted, referenced, discussed endlessly. The stories we're exploring tonight are different. These are the ones that slipped through the cracks. Too dark for movies. Too psychologically complex for casual fans. Too disturbing to be easily adapted. But they're real, and they're brilliant, and they deserve to be heard. Let me set the scene for you. Imagine Gotham City at night. Not the stylized Gotham of movies, but the Gotham of these comics. A city rotting from the inside out. Gothic architecture crumbling into ruin. Gargoyles watching from every corner, their stone eyes judging the decay below. Streets slick with rain that never seems to stop, washing grime from one place to another but never truly cleaning anything. The wealthy live in towers of glass and steel, pretending the streets below don't exist. The poor huddle in tenements that should have been condemned decades ago, and in between, in the cracks and shadows, live the forgotten ones. The homeless, the addicted, the mentally ill, the people Gotham gave up on. This is where our stories take place. Not in the spotlight of major crimes, but in the shadows where nobody looks. And watching over it all, from the heights of Wayne Tower or the depths of the Batcave, is Bruce Wayne, Batman, the Dark Knight. But the Batman of these stories is different from the one you might know. This isn't the confident hero who always has a plan. This is a man being worn down, night by night, case by case. A man who goes days without sleeping, who pushes his body past human limits, who sees horrors that would break ordinary people. Alfred Pennyworth watches him with growing concern. The butler, the father figure, the only family Bruce has left. Alfred sees Bruce coming home later each night, covered in more bruises, speaking less, eating less, becoming more obsessed. Alfred tries to intervene, tries to pull Bruce back from the edge, but Bruce won't listen. He can't listen. Because if he stops, if he rests, people die. Commissioner James Gordon stands on the roof of GCPD headquarters, hand on the bat signal, and he wonders about the man he calls when the darkness gets too deep. Gordon is a good cop in a corrupt city, one of the few honest men in Gotham, and he knows that Batman is necessary. But he also sees what this crusade is doing to his mysterious ally. He sees Batman taking more risks, being more brutal, dancing closer to the line he swore never to cross. And in the shadows, watching through security monitors and computer screens, is Barbara Gordon, Oracle. The former Batgirl, now paralyzed from the waist down thanks to the Joker's bullet, has reinvented herself as the information broker of the superhero community. She maintains the Batcomputer, tracks patterns, archives every case, and in those archives, she's noticed something troubling. Batman's rogues gallery is getting worse. Not just more dangerous, but more psychologically disturbed, more twisted, more broken. It's as if Gotham itself breeds madness. And at the heart of that madness sits Arkham Asylum. Arkham Asylum for the criminally insane. A gothic nightmare of a building perched on the outskirts of Gotham, its spires reaching toward the sky like accusations. Founded in 1921 by Amadeus Arkham, it was meant to be a place of healing, a sanctuary for troubled minds. Instead, it became a revolving door of horror. The patients escape constantly. Security is a joke. The staff ranges from incompetent to actively corrupt, and some say the building itself is cursed, built on ground that was tainted long before Amadeus laid the first stone. Batman knows Arkham is broken. He's known for years. But what's the alternative? Blackgate Penitentiary, where the criminally insane are thrown in with hardened criminals. Death penalty, which Gotham doesn't have. No, Arkham is the only option, flawed as it is. So the cycle continues. Batman catches them. Arkham holds them. They escape. People die. Batman catches them again. Over and over and over. And with each cycle, Batman descends a little deeper into the darkness he's fighting. This is the world of the stories we're about to explore. A world where mental illness and evil blur together, where victims and villains are sometimes the same person, where Batman fights not just criminals, but the fundamental brokenness of human psychology. These are the stories that ask the hardest questions. Can broken people be fixed? Is punishment justice? Does Batman help Gotham, or does he enable its sickness? And at what point does the man fighting monsters become a monster himself? Tonight we'll explore 7 cases that embody these questions. 7 real stories from Batman comics. 7 journeys into darkness. And they all begin in the same place. Beneath Gotham's streets, in the sewers and tunnels that most people pretend don't exist, where something ancient and hungry waits in the dark. Are you ready? Then let's descend into the case that broke Batman's mind. Let's talk about the cult. In 1988, writer Jim Starlin and artist Bernie Wrightson created something that DC Comics had never quite published before, a 4-issue prestige format series that would take Batman to places he had never gone. They called it The Cult, and it remains one of the most psychologically brutal Batman stories ever committed to paper. The story opens with Bruce Wayne attending a charity function. Typical Gotham elite gathering. Champagne. False smiles. People pretending the city isn't rotting around them. Bruce plays his part perfectly. The billionaire playboy who cares more about sports cars than suffering. But his mind is elsewhere. Reports have been coming in for weeks now. Homeless people disappearing from the streets. Dozens of them. The police aren't investigating. They never do when the victims are people nobody claims to care about. So Batman investigates. He starts in the Bowery, Gotham's worst neighborhood, talks to people living on the streets. People who know they're invisible to everyone else. They tell him about a preacher, a man who comes at night offering food, shelter, salvation. A man named Deacon Blackfire. The way they describe him is strange. Some say he's a miracle worker, others say he's dangerous, but they all agree on one thing. Once people go with Blackfire, they don't come back. Batman descends into the sewers beneath Gotham. Miles of tunnels that were built in the 1800s and mostly forgotten. Down there in the dark he finds evidence. Makeshift camps, religious symbols painted on walls, and then he finds people, hundreds of them, living in a massive underground compound that shouldn't exist. They're all following Deacon Blackfire. Blackfire himself is a tall man with wild hair and eyes that burn with absolute conviction. He preaches about Gotham's corruption, about how the city has abandoned its people, about how they will rise up and cleanse the streets. His followers worship him. They call him holy. They call him their savior. Batman watches from the shadows, gathering information. He sees Blackfire perform what looks like miracles. A sick woman suddenly walking, a drug addict shaking off their addiction in moments. Impossible things. Batman knows there has to be a rational explanation. Drugs, maybe. Hypnosis. Mass hysteria. Something. But then Blackfire turns and looks directly at where Batman is hiding, and he smiles. What happens next is where the story becomes truly disturbing. Batman is captured. The greatest detective in the world, the man who has fought gods and monsters, is taken down by Blackfire's followers. They overwhelm him through sheer numbers. 30 people, 40, 50. He fights brilliantly, but there are too many. They drag him before Blackfire. And that's when the nightmare begins. Blackfire doesn't kill Batman. He has something worse in mind. He wants to break him, to prove that even Batman, even this symbol of justice and will, is just another weak soul that can be bent to a stronger purpose. Blackfire begins a process of systematic psychological and chemical torture. He uses drugs that Batman has never encountered. Hallucinogens derived from plants that grow only in the deepest parts of the Amazon. compounds that attack the brain's ability to distinguish reality from fiction. But the drugs are only part of it. Blackfire is a master manipulator. He whispers to Batman constantly, tells him that his crusade is pointless, that Gotham will always be corrupt, that Bruce Wayne is just playing at being a hero while real suffering happens all around him. He forces Batman to watch as his followers commit acts of violence, tells him this is what real change looks like. Peaceful protest doesn't work. The system is too broken. Only blood can cleanse. Days pass. Then, weeks. Batman's sense of time dissolves. He's kept in a cell barely large enough to stand in, fed just enough to survive. The drugs keep coming. His mind starts to fracture. He has visions of his parents, of Thomas and Martha Wayne bleeding out in Crime Alley, and they ask him why he's wasting his life on a city that will never change. He sees Jason Todd, the second Robin who died, and Jason screams at him for being a failure as a mentor. Blackfire brings Batman out of his cell for rituals, dark ceremonies where the cult followers chant and sing, and here's the truly horrifying part. Blackfire makes Batman participate. Under the influence of the drugs and the psychological conditioning, Batman finds himself kneeling before Blackfire, finds himself repeating the words, finds himself believing even for moments that Blackfire might be right. The comic doesn't shy away from showing this. Bernie Wrightson's artwork makes it visceral. We see Batman, this icon of strength and willpower, reduced to a shaking, mumbling shell of himself. His costume is torn and filthy. His face is gaunt. His eyes are empty. He's been broken. Blackfire uses his newly converted weapon. He sends Batman out with groups of followers to commit crimes, to attack the corrupt officials of Gotham. And Batman does it. His body moves while his mind screams. He's aware enough to know what's happening but not capable of stopping himself. It's a violation more complete than any physical torture could achieve. Meanwhile, on the surface, Gotham is descending into chaos. Blackfire's cult has grown to thousands. They're attacking police stations, government buildings, anyone they deem corrupt, which in Gotham means almost everyone. The city is under siege from within. The National Guard is called in. Martial law is declared. But Blackfire's followers are everywhere, and they fight with the fervor of true believers. Robin Dick Grayson in this story returns to Gotham from his duties with the Teen Titans. He finds Alfred frantic. Batman has been missing for weeks. No contact, no sightings. Robin takes up the search his mentor began. He follows the same trail into the sewers, and when he finally finds Batman, the sight nearly destroys him. Batman is chained to a wall in Blackfire's inner sanctum. He's been beaten, starved, drugged for so long that withdrawal might kill him. Robin cuts him down and Batman collapses. He can barely speak. When he does, the words come out broken, fragments about salvation and blood and deserving punishment. Robin realizes with horror that Batman has been brainwashed. The escape from the sewers is harrowing. Batman can barely walk. He's paranoid, violent, unable to distinguish friend from enemy. Robin has to fight his own mentor at one point when Batman, in a drugged haze, attacks him thinking he's one of Blackfire's followers. They make it back to the Batcave, but the nightmare isn't over. Batman goes through withdrawal. The drugs Blackfire used were specifically designed to be addictive, to keep victims compliant. Alfred monitors his vital signs as Bruce thrashes and screams. The hallucinations are intense. He sees Blackfire everywhere, hears his voice. The preacher's words echo in his mind. You are weak. You have failed. Gotham deserves to burn. It takes days for Batman to regain something resembling sanity. Even then, he's not the same. There's a hollowness in his eyes, a hesitation that was never there before. Alfred begs him to rest, to take time to heal. Bruce refuses. Blackfire is still out there. The cult is still terrorizing Gotham. He has to stop it. He has to prove to himself that he wasn't broken. But he was broken, and everyone can see it except Bruce. The final confrontation between Batman and Blackfire happens in the ruins of Robinson Park, where the cult has gathered for their ultimate ceremony. Thousands of followers, all ready to die for their holy man. Batman crashes through them, fighting with a desperation that borders on madness. This isn't the calculated fighter who always has a plan. This is a man trying to exorcise his demons through violence. When Batman finally reaches Blackfire, the preacher isn't afraid. He welcomes Batman like a wayward son, tells him that this struggle is pointless, that Batman will always come back to him, that the seeds of doubt have been planted too deep to ever be removed. And the horrible thing is, there's truth in his words. Batman hesitates. For just a moment, he hesitates. That moment is enough. The National Guard moves in with lethal force. The compound is destroyed. Blackfire's followers scatter or are killed, and Blackfire himself dies in the chaos, crushed under falling debris. But before he dies, he looks at Batman and smiles, because he knows he won. He broke Batman. Even if just for a few weeks, he proved that the Dark Knight could be made to kneel. Batman survives. He returns to his mission, but he's changed. The story ends with Bruce in the Batcave, staring at his reflection in the computer screen. Alfred asks if he's all right. Bruce says yes, but both of them know it's a lie. This story was published as a prestige format miniseries, which means it was outside regular continuity and could be more extreme, but it was still canon. It still happened, and it remains one of the few times Batman was completely, utterly defeated. Not physically. Physically he's been beaten before, but mentally, psychologically, spiritually. Deacon Blackfire broke Batman's mind, and even though Bruce Wayne put himself back together, the cracks remained. You can see them in the stories that followed, a darkness that wasn't there before, a brutality, a willingness to cross lines he previously wouldn't have approached. The cult asked a question that most superhero comics avoid. What happens when the hero loses? Not in a fight, not in a case, but loses themselves, loses their sense of self, their convictions, their very identity, and what does it cost to find those things again? For Batman, the cost was steep, and it's a story that DC Comics rarely references anymore. Too dark, too disturbing, too real in its portrayal of psychological trauma, but it happened. It's there in the archives. A reminder that even the strongest among us can be broken given the right pressure in the right places. And this was just the first of many cases that would test Batman's sanity. Arnold Wesker first appeared in Detective Comics number 583, published in February 1988, the same year as the cult. It was as if Gotham decided that year to reveal its deepest psychological horrors all at once. But where Blackfire was a manipulator who broke others, Wesker was already broken when we met him. His story is different, more tragic, more uncomfortably real. Arnold Wesker suffers from dissociative identity disorder. In the comics, they call it multiple personality disorder, using the older terminology. He's a mild-mannered man, soft-spoken, gentle even, the kind of person you wouldn't look at twice on the street, balding, middle-aged, wearing cheap suits that don't quite fit. He worked as a warehouse clerk before his life fell apart, completely ordinary in every way. Except for Scarface. Scarface is a ventriloquist dummy, carved from wood, dressed in a 1920s gangster outfit, complete with pinstripe suit and fedora. He has a permanent sneer carved into his wooden face. A scar runs down one cheek, hence the name. And according to Arnold Wesker, Scarface is the one in charge. When Batman first encountered them, he thought it was simple. A mentally ill man using a dummy as a prop for his crimes. Wesker would be easy to stop. Get him away from the dummy. Get him proper psychiatric help. Case closed. But it wasn't simple. Nothing in Gotham ever is. The relationship between Wesker and Scarface defies easy explanation. When Scarface speaks, Wesker's lips move. Obviously, it's ventriloquism. But Wesker's entire demeanor changes. His posture shifts. His voice drops into a harsh gangster rasp. And here's the truly unsettling part. Wesker seems genuinely terrified of the dummy. He cowers before it, apologizes to it, begs it for mercy. Batman watched during their first confrontation as Wesker argued with Scarface. A full conversation, back and forth, but only one person speaking. Wesker pleading that they didn't need to hurt anyone. Scarface insisting that this is how business gets done. And when Scarface won the argument, which he always did, Wesker would carry out the orders with tears streaming down his face. It raised an impossible question. Was Wesker faking? Was this an elaborate act to fool the courts, to plead insanity? Or was he genuinely suffering from a fractured mind, unable to control the other personality that had taken residence in his consciousness? The origin story, revealed gradually through different comic issues, is heartbreaking. Arnold Wesker grew up in a home where he was never allowed to speak out of turn. His father was violently abusive. His mother was submissive and afraid. Arnold learned early that having opinions, expressing anger, showing any strong emotion, resulted in punishment. So he buried those feelings, pushed them down so deep that eventually they needed somewhere else to go. In his 20s, Arnold was working at a toy factory. There was an accident. A fire broke out. Arnold was trapped in a storage room full of unsold merchandise. For 3 hours, he sat in the dark, surrounded by smoke, convinced he was going to die. And in that room with him was a ventriloquist dummy, just sitting there on a shelf, watching him. When the firefighters finally rescued Arnold, he was catatonic, hospitalized for weeks. When he finally spoke again, he asked for the dummy. The doctors thought it might be therapeutic, a focal point for his trauma. They gave it to him. That was the beginning of Scarface. Arnold named the dummy after a gangster film he'd seen, started talking to it. At first the doctors noted it seemed healthy. Arnold was expressing emotions he'd suppressed his whole life. Anger, frustration, ambition. But he was expressing them through the dummy, keeping himself separate from those dangerous feelings. Then the dummy started talking back. Or rather, Arnold started talking back to himself, but he didn't seem to know he was doing it. The personality split became complete. Arnold Wesker, the frightened victim, and Scarface, the violent gangster who said and did everything Arnold couldn't allow himself to do. When Arnold was released from the hospital, Scarface took over his life, made him quit his job, made him start robbing stores, small stuff at first, then bigger jobs, building a criminal empire with Arnold as the unwilling puppet master, or perhaps more accurately, as the puppet himself. Batman investigated Arnold's background thoroughly, talked to his doctors, his former co-workers, anyone who knew him. Everyone said the same thing. Arnold was incapable of violence. He was kind, timid, apologetic. But Scarface had no such limitations. Scarface was everything Arnold couldn't be: confident, aggressive, lethal. The criminal underworld of Gotham found this hilarious at first. A grown man with a dummy, trying to play gangster. They laughed, until Scarface started killing people. Then nobody was laughing anymore. Because when Scarface gave an order, Arnold's body carried it out. The gentle man who couldn't hurt anyone became a murderer under Scarface's direction. And the worst part, the truly horrifying part, was that Arnold remembered everything. He was conscious during the killings, aware, trapped inside his own body while his hands pulled triggers, and his voice, speaking in that harsh gangster rasp, threatened and intimidated. Batman has faced many villains who enjoy their crimes. The Joker laughs while he kills. Two-Face believes he's serving justice. Even Scarecrow takes scientific interest in his victims' fear. But Arnold Wesker gets no satisfaction from any of it. He's a victim of his own fractured psyche, unable to stop himself, unable to resist the personality that has colonized his mind. During one confrontation, Batman managed to separate Arnold from the dummy, thought that would be enough. Arnold collapsed immediately, sobbing, thanking Batman for saving him. He begged to be taken to Arkham, to be kept away from Scarface forever. Batman called for the GCPD. The case seemed closed. But Arnold couldn't speak properly without Scarface present. He stuttered uncontrollably, couldn't form full sentences. His therapists at Arkham noted that without the dummy, Arnold barely functioned. He needed Scarface to communicate, even though Scarface was destroying his life. The dummy had become a crutch he couldn't live without. 3 weeks into his stay at Arkham, Arnold found another dummy in the recreation room. Just a cheap toy. Nothing like Scarface. But within hours, it was Scarface. The personality transferred. The voice returned. Arnold broke out that night, and the cycle continued. Batman tried everything. Destroyed every dummy Arnold acquired. Had Arnold placed in isolation where no objects could become vessels for Scarface. But Arnold's mind found ways. He'd draw a face on his hand and speak to it. Create a puppet from socks and paper. Once, terrifyingly, he seemed to project Scarface onto nothing at all, having full conversations with empty air. The psychological evaluations made for disturbing reading. Arnold wasn't faking. Multiple doctors confirmed it. This was genuine dissociative identity disorder, one of the most severe cases ever documented. The Scarface personality was completely developed, with its own memories, preferences, even different handwriting. When Arnold was Scarface, brain scans showed different patterns of neural activity. It was as if two people genuinely inhabited one body. But here's what kept Batman awake at night. Scarface claimed to be independent. Said he existed before Arnold found him. Said he was carved from the wood of a gallows tree, where 13 men were hanged in the 1800s. Said their anger and violence soaked into the wood, waiting for someone weak enough to possess. Obviously, Batman didn't believe in haunted dolls. There had to be a rational explanation. Arnold had probably read about the gallows tree somewhere, incorporated it into his delusion. The supernatural elements were just his mind trying to make sense of his fractured psyche. But then Batman examined the dummy. Had it carbon dated, the wood was indeed from the 1800s, from a tree that grew in the courtyard of old Gotham Prison, where hangings were performed. It proved nothing. Lots of old wood exists. Lots of trees grew in that courtyard. Coincidence, nothing more. Batman filed the report and moved on. Yet sometimes, late at night in the evidence room where Scarface was kept locked away, guards reported hearing laughter, a harsh, mocking laugh that sounded like it came from old gangster films. They'd check the room. Find nothing disturbed. The dummy sitting exactly where it had been left, that permanent sneer on its wooden face. Just wood and paint. Nothing more. Arnold Wesker remains in Arkham Asylum to this day in the comics. He's been there for decades now. Sometimes he's Wesker, crying and apologetic. Sometimes he's Scarface, threatening guards and plotting escapes. The doctors have tried everything. Medication, therapy, hypnosis. Nothing works. The personality split is too deep, too fundamental to who Arnold is. And Batman visits sometimes, sits across from Arnold in the visiting room, tries to reach the man trapped inside. Arnold always says the same thing. He's sorry, so sorry. He never wanted to hurt anyone. He just wanted the voice in his head to stop. Then Scarface takes over, tells Batman that one day he'll get out. One day he'll make the Bat pay for every time he's been locked up. The voice shifts mid-sentence. Arnold to Scarface. A gentle man to a violent monster. Same mouth. Same vocal cords. Two completely different people. There's no happy ending to Arnold Wesker's story. No cure. No redemption. Just an endless cycle of trying to contain a man who's his own worst enemy. A man who commits terrible crimes while hating every moment of it. A prisoner of his own fractured mind. It's one of the most tragic cases in Batman's files. Not a villain who chose evil, just a broken man who never stood a chance. After Wesker's most recent recapture, Batman returned to the Batcave at dawn. Alfred was waiting with hot coffee and a first aid kit. The butler noticed Bruce's hands shaking slightly as he removed his cowl, not from injury, from exhaustion. Alfred had seen this pattern before. Bruce would immerse himself in a case, refusing to stop until it was resolved. But these cases were different. They weren't bank robberies or kidnappings. They were descents into human psychology at its most fractured. Each one took something from Bruce, left him a little more hollow. The coffee sat untouched as Bruce moved to the Bat computer, started filing his report on Wesker, adding notes to a file that had grown depressingly thick over the years. Alfred watched him work, noticed the way Bruce's jaw tightened when he reviewed the psychiatric evaluations, the way his eyes lingered on phrases like no hope of recovery and permanent psychological damage. Outside the cave, Gotham was waking up. People heading to work, children walking to school, the ordinary machinery of city life grinding forward, completely unaware of the darkness that had unfolded in the night. Bruce stared at the monitors showing those morning streets and felt the familiar disconnect. Two worlds occupying the same space. One where people worried about traffic and deadlines, another where minds shattered and monsters wore human faces. Alfred finally spoke. Suggested that Bruce get some sleep, perhaps take a few days away from patrol. Let Dick handle things for a while. The usual arguments that they both knew Bruce would ignore. But this time something was different. Bruce didn't immediately refuse. He just sat there staring at the screen. Silent. The truth was that something had been nagging at Batman for months now, a pattern he couldn't quite articulate. The cases were getting worse, not just in frequency but in nature. His rogues gallery had always been colorful, theatrical even, but recently there had been a shift. The crimes were becoming more psychological, more focused on breaking minds rather than breaking banks. He pulled up his case files, started arranging them chronologically. Blackfire and his brainwashing, Wesker and his fractured identity. But there were others too. Mad Hatter's increasingly disturbing obsessions. Scarecrow's fear toxins causing permanent psychological damage. Even Joker seemed to be evolving, his crimes becoming less about the spectacle and more about crushing hope itself. Bruce began cross-referencing, looking for connections, common threads. The Batcomputer hummed as it processed decades of data, crime scenes, victim profiles, psychological evaluations, and slowly, something emerged. Not a conspiracy exactly, more like a theme. Almost all of his major enemies suffered from severe mental illness. That wasn't new information, but the severity was increasing. The disorders were becoming more extreme, more treatment-resistant, and they were all housed in the same place. Arkham Asylum. Bruce pulled up the facility's records, studied the building's history, which he'd reviewed countless times before, but never with this specific question in mind. Arkham had been founded in 1921 by Amadeus Arkham, a psychiatrist who wanted to create a haven for Gotham's mentally ill, a place of healing and hope. Instead, it had become Gotham's revolving door of nightmares. The escape statistics were damning. On average, a major breakout occurred every 3 months. Minor escapes happened weekly. Some inmates, like Joker, had escaped literally dozens of times. The security was supposedly state-of-the-art, constantly upgraded with the latest technology, yet somehow, it never seemed to matter. Bruce had always attributed this to corruption. Gotham's institutions were rotten to the core. Guards took bribes, administrators cut corners, politicians diverted funding, standard Gotham dysfunction. But what if there was more to it? What if the problem wasn't just corruption but something deeper? He opened the file on Amadeus Arkham himself. The founder's story was tragic and well documented. Amadeus had been a brilliant psychiatrist, genuinely dedicated to helping people. He had built the asylum on his family's estate after his mother went violently insane. He believed he could develop revolutionary treatments, could cure what everyone else considered incurable. Then one of his patients, a man named Martin Hawkins, nicknamed Mad Dog, escaped his restraints, found Amadeus's wife and daughter. The details of what Mad Dog did to them were sealed in the archives. Too disturbing even for police reports. But Amadeus found them, saw what remained. He didn't close the asylum. Instead, he continued working. Treated Mad Dog personally. Spent months with him, trying to understand what created such evil. And then one night, Amadeus strapped Mad Dog into the electroshock therapy chair, applied maximum voltage, held it far longer than any treatment required, essentially executed him while maintaining the veneer of therapy gone wrong. After that, Amadeus descended into madness himself, started believing his patients were speaking truths that sane people couldn't hear, carved occult symbols into his office floor, spent his final years as an inmate in his own asylum, convinced he was being possessed by the spirits of everyone who had died within those walls. He eventually died there, in a cell, alone. Bruce had read this history before, but now reviewing it with fresh eyes, questions emerged. The asylum had been built on the Arkham family estate, but what was there before the estate? He dug deeper into property records, found references to earlier structures. The land had been used as a cemetery in the 1700s. Before that, it had been the site of a colonial-era sanatorium. Before that, indigenous peoples had considered the area cursed, refused to settle there. Layer upon layer of suffering, all concentrated on one plot of ground. Bruce didn't believe in curses. He believed in psychology, chemistry, biology, rational explanations. But he also believed in patterns. And there was definitely a pattern here. Something about Arkham Asylum made people worse, not better, made mental illness more severe, made treatment impossible. He started pulling medical records, comparing patients' conditions before and after institutionalization. The data was stark. Patients entered Arkham with treatable disorders and left, when they left at all, with severe chronic conditions. Joker had been a failed comedian with depression. After Arkham he became a homicidal genius. Harleen Quinzel had been a promising psychiatrist. After working at Arkham she became Harley Quinn, as damaged as any inmate. The asylum wasn't curing anyone, it was making them worse, creating them in a sense. Alfred approached quietly, placed a hand on Bruce's shoulder, pointed out that the sun was fully up now. Bruce had been working through the entire night without noticing. The butler's voice was gentle but firm. Whatever pattern Bruce was chasing, it would still be there after a few hours of sleep. Bruce nodded, but didn't move from the computer. He was close to something. He could feel it. Some truth about Gotham that he'd been avoiding because it was too big, too systemic to fight. Individual criminals he could handle. Even organized crime syndicates had structures he could dismantle. But what if the problem wasn't individuals or organizations? What if Gotham itself was sick in some fundamental way? What if his war on crime was treating symptoms while the disease spread unchecked? He thought about the cases he'd just worked. Blackfire breaking him mentally, Wesker trapped in his own fractured psyche. These weren't evil people who chose villainy. They were sick people who became dangerous because their sickness went untreated, or worse, was amplified by the very institutions meant to help them. And Batman had been feeding into this cycle. Catching them, sending them to Arkham, watching them escape, catching them again, over and over, never asking if there was a better way, never questioning if he was part of the problem. The realization settled over him like a weight, not a sudden epiphany, but a slow, creeping dread. He'd dedicated his life to fighting crime in Gotham, trained his body and mind to perfection, spent billions on equipment and technology, and despite all of it, Gotham kept producing monsters, kept breaking people, kept destroying minds. Maybe it always would. Alfred squeezed his shoulder again, reminded him that even Batman had limits, that questioning everything at once was a path to paralysis. Sometimes you just had to do the work in front of you. Save who you could save, stop who you had to stop, Trust that it mattered, even when the larger pattern seemed insurmountable. Bruce finally stood up from the computer. Let Alfred guide him toward the manor, toward a bed and a few hours of rest. But the questions followed him, echoed in his mind as he tried to sleep, whispered that maybe, just maybe, he'd been fighting the wrong battle all along. And somewhere in Arkham Asylum, in cells and common rooms and therapy sessions, his enemies waited, some plotting escape, some lost in delusion, some simply existing in their broken states, neither improving nor deteriorating, just trapped in an endless present, like Gotham itself. 3 weeks after the Wesker incident, Batman received a call from Commissioner Gordon that made his blood run cold. 23 people had disappeared from Gotham's East End over the past month, all adults, all seemingly random victims with nothing connecting them. No ransom demands, no bodies, just gone. The GCPD had been treating them as separate missing persons cases until a pattern emerged. Each victim had last been seen near the old Gotham Opera House, a building that had been abandoned since a fire in 1992. Something was happening in that neighborhood. Something organized. Batman investigated the Opera House that night, found it exactly as the fire marshal reports described. Burned-out shell, structurally unsound, condemned. But as he moved through the wreckage, he noticed something. Fresh footprints in the ash, recent activity, and a smell underneath the char and decay. Antiseptic. Surgical. The basement had survived the fire mostly intact. Batman descended carefully, every instinct telling him he was walking into something bad. The surgical smell grew stronger. Mixed with it now was something else. Perfume. Cheap, overpowering perfume trying to mask an underlying stench of rot. What he found in that basement became one of the cases that still haunts him. Tables, medical equipment, surgical tools, and people. 17 people to be exact. They were alive, walking around, performing tasks like setting up chairs and cleaning floors, but something was fundamentally wrong with them. They moved in perfect unison, didn't speak, didn't react to Batman's presence even when he stood directly in front of them. Their faces were covered with masks. Not masks exactly, more like shells. Smooth, doll-like faces made of some kind of resin, permanently attached to their skin, fixed expressions of bland happiness. Their eyes visible through the openings showed no recognition, no awareness, just emptiness. Then Batman heard singing. Opera. A man's voice, trained and powerful, echoing through the basement. The voice grew closer, and a figure emerged from a side room. He wore a pig mask, grotesque and stained, a filthy surgical gown. His hands were covered in dried blood. Professor Pig. Real name, Laszlo Valentin. And these were his Dolatrons. Pig had appeared on Gotham's radar only recently. His first appearance was in 2007, created by writer Grant Morrison for the Batman and Robin comic series. But his impact was immediate and disturbing. Unlike most of Batman's rogues, who had clear psychological profiles and understandable motivations, Pig seemed to operate on a logic entirely his own. He called himself an artist, a perfectionist. He believed people were flawed, ugly, broken by society's expectations and their own inadequacies. His mission was to make them perfect, beautiful, pure. He would do this through surgery, through chemicals, through the application of his masks. The masks were the worst part. Pig created them from a compound he'd developed, something between plastic and living tissue. Once applied to a victim's face, they bonded at the cellular level, became part of them, couldn't be removed without killing the patient, and the process of applying the mask involved extensive brain surgery, lobotomy essentially, though Pig used more precise techniques. The result was a Dolatron, a living person with their personality completely erased. Obedient, docile, perfect in their emptiness. They could follow simple commands, but showed no initiative, no personality, no sense of self. They were alive in the biological sense, but dead in every way that mattered. Batman moved through the basement, checking each Dollatron, searching for any sign of the person they used to be. Found nothing. Their medical records were pinned to the walls like gallery pieces, before and after photos. Pig documented his work meticulously, showed the transformation from flawed human to perfect doll. Some of the Dollatrons had been missing for weeks. Others were recent additions. One had been reported missing only 3 days ago. A young woman named Sarah Chen who worked at a library. Her photo on the missing persons report showed someone vibrant, smiling. The Dollatron wearing her face and body showed nothing, just stood there, swaying slightly, waiting for instructions. Pig emerged fully from his operating theater, started monologuing the way theatrical villains do, but his words had a genuine conviction that made them chilling. He spoke about art, about purity, about how society corrupted people, made them ugly with its demands and expectations. His Dollatrons were free from all that, free from pain, from anxiety, from the burden of choice. He'd saved them, he insisted. Made them beautiful. Batman tried to reason with him, asked about consent, about the lives these people had before. Pig seemed genuinely confused by the question. They were flawed before, now they were perfect. What did their previous existence matter? He'd given them something better than life. He'd given them art. The fight that followed was brutal. Pig commanded his Dollatrons to attack, and they obeyed without hesitation. Batman found himself fighting people who felt no pain, showed no fear, and couldn't be reasoned with. He had to disable them without causing serious harm, which meant pulling every punch, limiting every strike. They kept coming. Blank doll faces catching the light, empty eyes tracking his movement. He realized with horror that some of them had been children. Small Dollatrons mixed in with the adults. Pig's art didn't discriminate by age. Batman finally reached Pig himself, took him down with a calculated strike that avoided the pig mask and focused on pressure points. Pig collapsed, still singing opera even as Batman restrained him, still talking about beauty and perfection and art. The GCPD arrived to a scene that would require years of therapy for the responding officers. 17 Dollatrons standing motionless in the basement, evidence of 6 more victims whose bodies Pig had discarded when his procedures failed. Surgical equipment covered in biological matter, and Pig himself calmly explaining his process to anyone who would listen, genuinely proud of his work. The medical team that examined the Dollatrons delivered the verdict Batman already knew. The masks couldn't be removed. The brain damage was extensive and permanent. These people would never recover. They could be housed in facilities cared for physically, but they would never again be who they were. Their families could visit bodies that looked like their loved ones but contained no recognition, no memory, no personality. Some families chose to keep visiting, sat with their transformed relatives, talked to them even though they never responded, held hands that didn't squeeze back. Others couldn't bear it, preferred to remember the person as they were rather than witness what they'd become. Sarah Chen's mother visited every week for 6 months, brought books from the library where Sarah had worked, read to her daughter who stood perfectly still, that doll face showing permanent bland contentment, while her mother's voice cracked with grief. Eventually she stopped coming. The psychological toll was too severe. Pig went to Arkham. Naturally. Housed in a maximum security wing. His pig mask was taken as evidence, but he fashioned a new one from paper and elastic within days. The doctors noted that he seemed calm, even happy. He'd created art. That art would last forever. In his mind he'd succeeded. Batman returned to the opera house several times after that, stood in that basement where 17 lives had been erased, tried to find something he'd missed. Some way he could have prevented this. The case haunted him because there was no fixing it, no redemption. Those people were gone, and nothing Batman did would bring them back. He'd faced death before, had watched people die despite his best efforts, but this was different. These victims were alive, would likely live for decades in their current state. a fate arguably worse than death. They existed in a permanent limbo, neither living nor dead, just endlessly performing the simple tasks that pig's surgery allowed them to manage. The question that kept Batman awake was simple and terrible. If he'd found them sooner, could he have stopped it? And if he found Pig's next operation, which everyone knew was inevitable given Arkham's track record, would he be fast enough next time? The answer, based on decades of experience with Gotham's revolving door of justice, was probably not. Jervis Tetch first appeared in Batman comics in 1948, one of the older members of Batman's rogues gallery. Back then he was a straightforward gimmick villain, a short man obsessed with Alice in Wonderland, who committed crimes with a tea party theme, almost whimsical in his presentation. But as Batman comics evolved and matured, so did the Mad Hatter. What emerged from that evolution was something far more disturbing than the original conception. The modern version of Tetch is a neuroscientist, brilliant in his field. He holds multiple patents in neural interface technology. His area of expertise is mind control, specifically through the use of electronic chips embedded in hats. The technology is sophisticated enough that it bypasses traditional free will entirely. When someone wears one of Tetch's hats, they become extensions of his desires, puppets dancing on invisible strings. But the technology is just the method. The motivation is where things become deeply uncomfortable. Tetch is obsessed with Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland, not just fond of it or inspired by it. Genuinely, pathologically obsessed. He sees himself as the Mad Hatter from the story, believes he exists in Wonderland, that Gotham is a twisted version of Carroll's fantasy, and more disturbingly, he's constantly searching for his Alice. In the comics, this obsession has taken dark turns. Tetch kidnaps young blonde women, often teenagers, usually named Alice or variations thereof. He keeps them prisoner, dresses them in blue dresses and white aprons, forces them to participate in his tea parties. And because he's a neuroscientist with mind control technology, he can make them play along, make them smile and laugh, and pretend to enjoy his company, while their real selves scream inside their own heads. The longest canonical storyline involving the Mad Hatter appeared in Detective Comics, and later in Batman the Animated Series, though the animated version sanitized his worse impulses. In the comics, Tetch's attraction to these young women is explicitly sexual. He doesn't act on it directly in most storylines, maintaining the delusion that he's a gentleman from a storybook, but the undertones are unmistakable and intentional. Batman encountered one of Tetch's victims during an investigation into missing persons, a 17-year-old girl named Alice Pleasance, named by her literature professor parents after the real girl who inspired Carroll's story. She'd been missing for 6 weeks. When Batman found her, she was sitting at a table in an abandoned warehouse, wearing a blue dress, pouring imaginary tea from an empty pot. She was smiling, laughing at jokes that weren't funny, responding to Tetch's rambling monologues about nonsense and wonder, but her hands were shaking, and when Batman looked closer, he could see tears running down her face, even as she smiled. The mind control chip forced her to play along, to act happy, but it couldn't stop her body's autonomous responses to fear and trauma. Tetch was furious at Batman's interruption, insisted that Alice was happy, that she loved being there. Look at her smile, listen to her laugh. Batman had no right to take her away from Wonderland. This was where she belonged. Batman removed the hat. The chip detached with it, and Alice collapsed immediately. Started screaming. Couldn't stop screaming. The paramedics had to sedate her just to transport her safely. She spent 3 months in psychiatric care after that. The experience of being trapped in her own body, aware but unable to control her actions or words, had fractured something fundamental in her psyche. She wasn't Tetch's first victim, or his last. Batman's files documented at least 12 young women who'd been subjected to similar treatment, each one left psychologically scarred, each one requiring years of therapy to process what had been done to them, and these were just the ones Batman knew about. Tetch had been operating for decades before his arrest. How many others were there? How many women still walking around Gotham, trying to live normal lives, but unable to trust their own minds because they remembered what it felt like to be overridden? The violation was complete. Physical assault leaves marks that fade. Emotional abuse can be processed and overcome, but having your very will stolen, your sense of self temporarily erased, creates a wound that never fully heals. These women had been turned into passengers in their own bodies, made to participate in their own captivity, forced to smile at their captor. Tetch showed no remorse. Genuinely couldn't understand why anyone was upset. He treated his Alices like princesses, given them beautiful dresses, hosted lovely tea parties, recited poetry to them. In his delusional mind he'd been nothing but a gentleman. The fact that they were prisoners, that their apparent happiness was artificially induced, didn't register as wrong to him. His psychological evaluations at Arkham made for disturbing reading. Tetch had a severe delusional disorder, believed completely that he lived in Wonderland, that the laws of reality didn't apply to him, that his actions were innocent because they occurred in a fantasy world where consequences weren't real. The doctors noted that he showed genuine affection for his victims, talked about them fondly, remembered details about them, but only as characters in his story, not as real people with their own agency. One therapist tried to break through the delusion, asked Tetch what he thought happened to the women after he released them. Tetch seemed confused by the question. Release them? Why would he release them? They were happy in Wonderland. The therapist pressed, pointed out that Batman had rescued these women, that they'd been terrified, that they'd required medical treatment. Tetch's response was chilling in its sincerity. Batman was the villain in this story, the Jabberwocky, the Queen of Hearts, a monster who stole away the happy residents of Wonderland and dragged them back to the miserable real world. Those women had been saved from their dreary lives, given purpose and joy, and Batman had condemned them back to suffering. He genuinely believed it. The therapist noted that Tetch showed no signs of lying or performing. This was truly how he understood the situation. His delusion was so complete, so carefully constructed, that nothing could penetrate it. Batman had faced this kind of fractured reality before. Joker lived in his own twisted worldview. Two-Face saw everything through the lens of duality, but Tetch was different. There was an innocence to his delusion. He didn't want to hurt people. He wanted to save them, bring them to Wonderland where everything would be wonderful. The fact that his Wonderland was a nightmare to everyone else simply didn't compute. The technology Tetch developed had implications far beyond his personal crimes. His mind control chips were revolutionary. Multiple organizations tried to acquire the technology. Intelligence agencies wanted it for interrogation. Criminals wanted it for obvious reasons. Even some medical researchers thought it might have applications for treating certain psychological conditions. Batman ensured none of them got it. Destroyed every chip he found. Deleted Tetch's research from every server. The technology was too dangerous, too easily abused. Even if it started with good intentions, the power to override human will inevitably lead to horror. But he couldn't destroy what was in Tetch's mind. The man could recreate his work from memory, and every time he escaped Arkham, which he did with disturbing regularity, he'd build new chips, find new victims, create new trauma. There's a recording in the Batcomputer archives, an interview Batman conducted with Alice Pleasance 2 years after her rescue. She'd made progress in therapy, returned to school, was trying to rebuild her life. Batman asked if she'd be willing to testify if Tetch ever went to trial. Her response was quiet but firm. She couldn't. Even thinking about him made her panic. Sometimes she'd be doing something ordinary, making coffee or reading a book, and suddenly she'd feel like she wasn't controlling her own hands. Like something else was moving her. She knew it wasn't real. The chip was gone. But the feeling remained. The memory of what it was like to be a passenger in her own body. She asked Batman a question then. Wanted to know if he could promise that Tetch would never escape again, never hurt anyone else. Batman, always honest. Said he couldn't promise that Arkham's security was improved constantly, but breaches still occurred. He would do everything in his power to prevent it, but he couldn't guarantee it. Alice nodded. Said she understood, then asked Batman to leave. She needed to be alone. That conversation haunted Bruce Wayne, because it crystallized something he'd been avoiding. His war on crime operated on the assumption that justice was possible, that bad people could be stopped, good people protected, and order maintained. But what happened when the systems meant to contain evil kept failing? When the same monsters kept escaping to create new victims? When justice became a temporary reprieve, rather than a permanent solution? He had no answer. Just kept fighting, kept hoping that this time somehow it would be different. Victor Zsasz entered Batman's world in 1992, appearing in Batman Shadow of the Bat, issue number 1. Unlike the theatrical villains who dominated Gotham's criminal landscape, Zsasz brought something different to the table, something quieter, more methodical, and infinitely more chilling because of how ordinary he seemed. He was a serial killer, in the truest sense. No gimmicks, no elaborate schemes, no desire for attention or fame, just a man with a knife, and an unshakable belief that he was doing the world a service. Zsasz's origin is almost mundane in its tragedy. He was born into wealth. His parents owned a successful international corporation. Victor grew up with every advantage: private schools, Ivy League education, a future mapped out and guaranteed. Then his parents died in a boating accident when he was 25, left him everything. Millions of dollars, complete financial freedom. And Victor discovered he had no idea what to do with it. Without the structure his parents had provided, without obligations or expectations, Victor drifted, started gambling, found he was good at it initially. The thrill of risk became the only thing that made him feel alive. He played higher stakes, bigger games, and eventually, inevitably, his luck turned. He lost everything. The company, the fortune, the mansion, all of it gone across card tables and roulette wheels. Standing on the Gotham Bridge one night, broke and purposeless, Victor decided to end it, jumped into the cold water below. But as he sank, something happened. Whether it was survival instinct or something else, Victor fought his way back to the surface, swam to shore, collapsed on the rocks, coughing up river water, and in that moment he had what he considered an epiphany. Life was meaningless. The struggle to survive was pointless. Everyone was trapped in existential prisons, going through motions without purpose, suffering without reason. Death was the only true freedom, and if he couldn't give himself that freedom, he could give it to others. That night, Victor killed a homeless man. Someone he found sleeping under the bridge, used a piece of broken glass to cut the man's throat, and as he watched the life drain away, Victor felt something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. He'd liberated someone from the prison of existence, given them the gift of nothingness. He carved a mark into his own arm, a tally mark. One life freed. That was the beginning of Victor Zsasz's mission. What makes Zsasz so disturbing is his complete sincerity. He's not sadistic, doesn't torture his victims or draw out their deaths. His kills are quick and efficient. A knife to the throat or through the heart, over in seconds. He views it as mercy, an act of compassion in a universe devoid of meaning. After each kill, he adds another mark to his body, tally marks carved into his own flesh, with the same knife he uses on his victims. By the time Batman first encountered him, Zsasz had over 200 marks covering his arms, chest, back, and legs, each one a person he'd freed. Each one a scar he wore with pride. The GCPD struggled with Zsasz because his victim selection was completely random. He had no type, no preference for age, gender, race, or economic status. He killed whoever he encountered when the urge struck. A businessman walking to his car, a student leaving the library, an elderly woman feeding pigeons. To Zsasz, they were all equally trapped. all equally deserving of liberation. This randomness made him almost impossible to predict. No pattern to his hunting grounds. No cooling-off period between kills. No signature beyond the tally marks he left on his own body. Just a man moving through Gotham, killing whenever opportunity presented itself. Batman's first real confrontation with Zsasz came when Victor made a mistake. Attacked someone in a populated area during daylight. A woman walking through Robinson Park with her daughter. Zsasz approached with his knife, ready to free them both. Batman intervened seconds before the blade found its target. The fight was brief but intense. Zsasz fought with the desperation of someone who believed absolutely in his cause, screamed at Batman that he was condemning these people to lives of suffering, that Batman was the real villain. The real monster. All Zsasz wanted was to help. Batman subdued him, saw the marks covering Zsasz's body, counted over 200, felt something close to despair. 200 people, 200 lives taken by this empty-eyed man who thought he was showing mercy. At Arkham, Zsasz's evaluations revealed a complete absence of empathy. Not in the aggressive way that psychopaths sometimes present, but in a more fundamental sense. He simply didn't recognize other people as real. They were philosophical abstractions. Characters in a meaningless play. Their deaths weren't tragedies because their lives weren't valuable to begin with. The therapist tried everything. Medication to address the nihilism, cognitive therapy to challenge his worldview, even experimental treatments. Nothing worked. Zsasz listened politely to everything they said, nodded in the right places, then calmly explained that they were wrong, that they were trapped in the same delusion as everyone else. That meaning was an illusion people created to avoid confronting the void. He was always calm, always reasonable, never raised his voice or showed anger, just explained his philosophy with the patience of someone teaching a child basic arithmetic. Life equals suffering. Death equals release. Therefore death is preferable to life. The logic was simple, and to him irrefutable. What kept Batman awake wasn't just the body count. It was the question Zsasz represented. The man had completely rejected the foundation of everything Batman fought for. Batman's crusade assumed life had value, that protecting people mattered, that justice and order were worth pursuing. Zsasz looked at those same assumptions and saw delusion, and Batman couldn't prove him wrong. Not philosophically. He could stop Zsasz, could lock him away, could prevent him from killing, but he couldn't argue against the fundamental premise, couldn't prove that life had inherent meaning, or that suffering served a purpose. Those were articles of faith, not logic. Zsasz escaped Arkham 11 times over the years. Each escape resulted in more deaths, more tally marks, more families destroyed. The pattern was predictable. Security would be improved, new protocols implemented. Zsasz would find a flaw, walk out, start killing. Batman would recapture him. The cycle would repeat. After the 5th escape, Batman and Commissioner Gordon had a conversation they'd both been avoiding. Gordon asked the question directly. Would Gotham be better off if Zsasz died? If during the next confrontation, Batman used lethal force, one death to prevent dozens more? Batman's answer was immediate. No. The moment he crossed that line, he became something else. Something he couldn't come back from. His code wasn't just about morality. It was about maintaining his own humanity, in the face of people like Zsasz who'd lost theirs. Gordon accepted that, understood it even. But he also saw the crime scene photos. The victims who died in the weeks between Zsasz's escapes. Young people, old people, people with families who loved them, all gone because of a broken system, and a man who couldn't be fixed. There was a case that particularly haunted Batman. Zsasz had escaped for the 9th time. Batman tracked him to an apartment building, found him in a family's home, parents already dead. Their 2 children, a boy and a girl, cowering in a corner while Zsasz stood over them with his knife. Batman arrived seconds before Zsasz could complete his mission, tackled him, fought him, the children screaming, their parents bleeding out on the floor, Batman's fist connecting with Zsasz's face again and again. Not calculated strikes, not controlled combat, just rage. Alfred had to help him clean the blood off his knuckles back in the cave. Bruce's hands were shaking. He'd come so close to killing Zsasz in that moment, so close to crossing the line he'd sworn never to approach. The only thing that stopped him was seeing his reflection in a mirror on the wall, seeing what he looked like in that moment of fury, seeing the monster he was becoming. Zsasz went back to Arkham. The children went into foster care after their parents' funeral. The tally marks on Zsasz's body increased by 2, and Batman added another failure to his conscience. The philosophical question remained. What do you do with someone who can't be fixed, who won't stop, who genuinely believes he's helping, who operates from such a fundamentally different worldview that communication becomes impossible? Batman didn't have an answer, just kept stopping Zsasz, kept sending him back to Arkham, kept hoping that somehow, despite all evidence to the contrary, this time would be different. It never was. After the Zsasz recapture, Batman found himself standing in front of Arkham Asylum at 3 in the morning. Not in costume, just Bruce Wayne in a dark coat, staring up at the gothic monstrosity that housed Gotham's most broken minds. He'd been here countless times, delivered prisoners, consulted with doctors, investigated escapes, but he'd never really looked at the building itself, not like this. The architecture was wrong. That was the first thing that struck him. Victorian Gothic pushed to an extreme that bordered on parody. Spires reaching toward the sky like accusations, gargoyles leering from every corner, windows too narrow, walls too thick. The whole structure designed to contain rather than heal. It looked less like a hospital and more like a prison or a tomb. Bruce had done his research over the past few weeks, pulled every record he could find on Arkham Asylum's history. What he discovered was a foundation built on tragedy and soaked in blood. The land itself had a history. Before Amadeus Arkham built his asylum, the property had been farmland. Before that, a colonial cemetery. Records from the 1700s showed it had been the site of a smallpox quarantine facility. Before European settlers arrived, the indigenous Lenape people who inhabited the region had avoided this particular area. Their oral histories, preserved in scattered documents, described it as a place where the boundary between worlds grew thin, where spirits lingered. Bruce didn't believe in spirits, but he believed in patterns, and the pattern here was undeniable. Suffering had saturated this ground for centuries. Amadeus Arkham had built his asylum in 1921 with the best intentions. His mother, Elizabeth Arkham, had gone violently insane when Amadeus was a child. She'd killed his father with a knife, claimed demons had commanded her to do it. Amadeus watched his mother deteriorate in the state asylum, watched her receive treatments that were more torture than therapy. He vowed to create something better, a place where the mentally ill would be treated with dignity and compassion. He converted the family estate into a hospital, used his entire inheritance to fund it, hired the best doctors he could find, developed treatment protocols based on the latest psychological research. For the first few years, Arkham Asylum was considered revolutionary, a model facility that other institutions tried to emulate. Then Martin Hawkins arrived. A serial killer known as Mad Dog. He'd murdered 4 families before the police caught him. The courts declared him criminally insane, sent him to Arkham for treatment rather than prison. Amadeus took personal responsibility for Hawkins' case, spent hours in therapy sessions trying to understand what created such evil, believed deeply that every mind could be healed, every soul redeemed. Hawkins played along, seemed to be making progress, talked about his childhood trauma, expressed remorse for his crimes. All the markers of genuine rehabilitation. It was an act. Hawkins was studying Amadeus during those sessions, learning about him, particularly interested in his family. His wife Constance, his daughter Harriet, asked innocent-seeming questions about them. Amadeus, trusting and eager to believe in Hawkins' reformation, answered. On April 1, 1921, Hawkins escaped his restraints during a session, overpowered a guard, made his way through the asylum to the private quarters where Amadeus's family lived. What he did to Constance and Harriet was so brutal that the police reports were sealed. Amadeus found them hours later when he realized Hawkins was missing. The official story said Amadeus continued working, threw himself into his mission with renewed dedication, used his grief to fuel his commitment to helping others. That was the version told in medical journals and historical accounts. The truth was darker, much darker. Batman had found Amadeus's personal journals in the sealed archives. The real journals, not the sanitized versions published after his death. They painted a very different picture of what happened after his family's murder. Amadeus didn't just continue treating Hawkins. He tortured him, used electroshock therapy at voltages far beyond therapeutic levels, kept him in isolation for weeks at a time, forced him to look at photographs of Constance and Harriet for hours while describing in clinical detail what had been done to them, called it aversion therapy, called it treatment. Eventually Hawkins died during one of these sessions. The official cause was listed as heart failure during electroshock therapy, an accident. Tragic but understandable given his condition. Nobody questioned it too deeply. Mad Dog was a monster, few people mourned his passing. But Amadeus's journals revealed the truth. He'd killed Hawkins deliberately, cranked the voltage higher and higher, while watching the life drain from the man's eyes. It wasn't an accident, it was execution disguised as medicine. After that, something broke in Amadeus. His journal entries became increasingly erratic. He started seeing his dead family, hearing their voices. They told him things, secrets about the other patients, predictions about the future. He began carving symbols into the floorboards of his office. Occult markings copied from books he'd been reading, books about spiritualism and communication with the dead. His colleagues noticed the changes, suggested he take time off, seek treatment himself. Amadeus refused, insisted he was fine, that the asylum needed him, that his family was guiding him in his work. He started making decisions that didn't make sense, kept dangerous patients in minimal security, released others who clearly weren't ready. His treatment methods became increasingly experimental and ethically questionable. Several patients died under his care. Each time, Amadeus claimed it was unavoidable, complications from their conditions. Nobody wanted to challenge the founder of the institution. By 1929, Amadeus was living full-time in the asylum, barely sleeping, barely eating. His office became a shrine to his dead family, photographs covering the walls, their belongings arranged like relics. He talked to empty chairs during staff meetings, responding to questions nobody else could hear. Finally, in 1930, the board had to act. Amadeus was declared unfit, committed as a patient in his own asylum. He lived there for another 16 years, occupying a cell in the maximum security wing. His journals from this period were almost incomprehensible. Fragments of sentences, drawings of symbols, page after page of the same phrase written over and over until his hand must have cramped. They never leave. The walls remember. Amadeus died in his cell in 1946. No family left to mourn him. No ceremony. Just another body removed from Arkham and buried in the family plot behind the building. But the asylum continued. Other administrators took over. The facility expanded. More wings were added. Security systems upgraded. The name Arkham became synonymous with Gotham's approach to criminal insanity. And every few years, another scandal, another investigation. Reports of patient abuse, suspicious deaths, corrupt staff members, escapes that shouldn't have been possible. The problems were always attributed to individual failures, bad apples, insufficient funding, never to something systemic. Bruce stood in front of the building now, journals filled with Amadeus's deteriorating handwriting fresh in his mind, and wondered if the problems went deeper than corruption or incompetence, wondered if there was something fundamentally wrong with trying to heal people in a place built on such profound trauma. Every villain he'd faced recently had passed through Arkham. Most had gotten worse, not better. Wesker had been a nervous man with dissociative episodes. After Arkham, he became the Ventriloquist. Tech had been a delusional scientist. After Arkham, he became the Mad Hatter. Even Joker, whatever he'd been before, had crystallized into his final form within these walls. The Asylum wasn't curing anyone. It was transforming them, taking broken people and making them into monsters, and Batman had been complicit in this for years, catching criminals and delivering them here, trusting that the system would handle rehabilitation while he handled justice. But the system was broken. Maybe had always been broken. Maybe was designed to be broken from the moment Amadeus built it on ground soaked in suffering and filled it with his own trauma and guilt. A light came on in one of the upper windows. Someone was awake. Batman wondered which patient was lying in their cell, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of stone and history pressing down on them. Which doctor was working late, trying to help people in a building that seemed designed to prevent healing. He turned away from Arkham, headed back to his car, but the questions followed him. If the Asylum was part of the problem, what was the solution? Where else could Gotham send its criminally insane? What other options existed? And what did it mean that he'd been feeding people into this broken system for years without questioning whether he was helping or harming? The Batcave felt colder than usual when he returned, the computer screens glowing in the darkness. Alfred had left coffee and a note suggesting sleep. Bruce ignored both, pulled up his files on Arkham, started cross-referencing every patient admission with their subsequent criminal activity. The data was damning. Nearly every villain in his rogues gallery had gotten worse after institutionalization. Some had been admitted for relatively minor offenses and emerged as major threats. The Asylum wasn't just failing to rehabilitate. It was actively creating the criminals Batman spent his nights fighting. Dawn broke over Gotham. Bruce was still at the computer, still searching for answers that probably didn't exist, still hoping that understanding the problem would somehow reveal a solution. But all he kept finding were more questions, more victims, more evidence that the city he'd sworn to protect was sick in ways he couldn't fight with his fists or his gadgets. Somewhere in Arkham, patients were waking up to another day of treatment that wouldn't help them. Another day in rooms that remembered decades of suffering. Another day closer to their inevitable escape and the crimes they'd commit while free. And Batman would catch them again. Send them back again. Watch the cycle repeat again. Because what else could he do? Hugo Strange appeared in Detective Comics number 36, published in February 1940, making him one of Batman's oldest adversaries. But unlike many Golden Age villains who were eventually forgotten or reduced to camp, Strange evolved into something far more sinister as the decades passed. He started as a mad scientist archetype, bald head, lab coat, generic evil schemes. But in 1977, writer Steve Englehart reimagined Strange for a storyline called Prey. That reimagining transformed him from a forgettable relic into one of Batman's most psychologically dangerous enemies. Hugo Strange was a psychiatrist, one of the best in his field, published extensively in academic journals, lectured at universities, built a reputation as an expert in criminal psychology and behavioral analysis. When Gotham City government decided they needed a psychological profile of Batman, they hired Strange to create it. It was supposed to be a straightforward consulting job. Study Batman's behavior, analyze his methods, determine his psychological state, provide recommendations for how law enforcement should handle him. Strange accepted the contract and began his research with professional detachment. That detachment lasted approximately 3 weeks. Strange became obsessed, started studying every Batman sighting, every case file, every witness report. He analyzed fighting techniques, deduced training backgrounds, calculated response times, built psychological profiles based on decision patterns, and somewhere during this process, Strange stopped seeing Batman as a research subject and started seeing him as something else. The greatest human achievement he'd ever encountered. In Strange's clinical opinion, Batman represented the absolute peak of human potential, physical conditioning beyond Olympic standards, intellect that rivaled the world's greatest detectives, willpower that allowed him to function under conditions that would break normal people, and most fascinating to Strange, the psychological architecture required to maintain this dual identity, to be both Bruce Wayne and Batman without fragmenting completely. Strange wrote in his private notes that studying Batman was like watching evolution in action, a human being who had transcended ordinary limitations through pure will and discipline, not a meta-human with powers, not an alien or a god, just a man who had made himself into something more through dedication and sacrifice. The obsession deepened. Strange started spending 18-hour days on his research, neglected his other patients. His colleagues expressed concern. His behavior was becoming erratic, unhealthy. He needed to step back from this project. Strange refused. He was close to something, close to understanding. Not just who Batman was, but what Batman was. The underlying principles that created such a being, and if he could understand those principles, he could replicate them. He could become Batman. It took Strange 6 months to deduce the truth, 6 months of analysis and cross-referencing and elimination, and then one night reviewing footage of a charity gala, he saw it. The way Bruce Wayne moved, a slight hitch in his left shoulder from an old injury. The same hitch visible in footage of Batman taken 3 days later. Dozens of other tiny correlations, posture, speech patterns, timing. Bruce Wayne was Batman. The moment Strange confirmed it, something shifted in his mind. A normal person might have felt triumph at solving the mystery, or perhaps fear at the implications. Strange felt neither. He felt destiny. If Bruce Wayne could transform himself into Batman, then Hugo Strange, armed with this knowledge, could do the same, could become what Batman was, could surpass him even. Because Strange understood the psychology now, understood the mechanisms, could approach the transformation scientifically rather than through Wayne's emotional trauma response. Strange didn't expose Bruce's identity. That would end the experiment. Instead, he began his own transformation, started training physically, learned combat techniques, acquired equipment, created his own costume, similar to Batman's but modified to reflect Strange's superior understanding of the underlying principles. He called himself the Night Scourge, began operating in Gotham, not fighting crime exactly, more accurately, creating situations where Batman would respond and Strange could observe him up close, study him in action, learn from him. Batman noticed Strange's activities quickly, recognized them as deliberate provocations, investigated and discovered Strange was behind them, confronted him in Strange's laboratory, and in that confrontation, Strange revealed everything that he knew, that he understood, that he was going to become something greater than Batman, because he was approaching it with intellect rather than emotion. The fight that followed wasn't physical. Strange wasn't ready for that yet. Instead, it was psychological warfare. Strange describing in clinical detail what created Batman, the trauma, the guilt, the arrested development, the obsessive-compulsive tendencies, the probable undiagnosed disorders, dissecting Bruce Wayne's psyche like a laboratory specimen. And Bruce listened. Couldn't help but listen, because everything Strange said was true. He was obsessive. He was driven by childhood trauma he'd never processed. He probably did have diagnosable conditions. His entire crusade might be an elaborate coping mechanism, rather than genuine heroism. Strange smiled as he watched these thoughts play across Bruce's face, told him that understanding was the first step. Once you saw the mechanisms, you could control them. master them, transcend them. Strange would show him how. Together they could perfect what Batman was, make it sustainable, make it scientific. Bruce's response was to destroy Strange's laboratory, shatter every piece of equipment, burn every file, and tell Strange that Batman wasn't a formula to be replicated, wasn't a science experiment, was something that emerged from specific circumstances that Strange, for all his intelligence, would never understand because he'd never experienced them. Strange was arrested, sent to Arkham for psychiatric evaluation, and in Arkham, surrounded by other patients, Strange continued his research, studied the inmates, analyzed their disorders, began developing treatments, not to cure them, but to enhance them, to make them better villains, more challenging opponents for Batman. Because Strange had realized something during his brief clash with Bruce, he couldn't become Batman. The transformation required trauma Strange had never experienced, and honestly, didn't want to experience. But he could create better adversaries for Batman, could push Batman to evolve, could make the experiment more interesting. Over the years, Strange was released and recaptured multiple times. Each time he'd been working on some new scheme involving Batman. Once he auctioned off Batman's secret identity to Gotham's criminal underworld, not because he wanted the money, but because he wanted to see how Batman would respond to that level of exposure. Bruce had to systematically discredit the information, make it seem like Strange was lying or delusional, convince Gotham's criminals that Hugo Strange was just another Arkham inmate with delusions. It took months and damaged Bruce's reputation in ways that couldn't fully be repaired, but it worked. Most people dismiss Strange's claims as ravings, but Strange knew, and Bruce knew that Strange knew, and that knowledge hung between them like a knife. The worst part wasn't the threat of exposure. Bruce had contingency plans for that. The worst part was Strange's continuing obsession, his need to understand Batman, to dissect him, to improve him. Strange genuinely believed he was helping, that by creating challenges and obstacles, he was forcing Batman to reach his full potential. In Strange's mind, their relationship was symbiotic. Batman needed worthy opponents to justify his existence. Strange provided those opponents, studied Batman's responses, adjusted variables. It was the greatest psychological experiment ever conducted. Batman was simultaneously the subject and the purpose. Bruce tried to explain to Strange during one of their encounters that people were dying, that these weren't experiments but real crimes with real victims. Strange nodded thoughtfully, said that was regrettable but necessary. Science required sacrifice, understanding required data, and the data they were generating together was unprecedented. There was no reaching him. No way to make Strange see the immorality of what he was doing, because in Strange's worldview, the pursuit of knowledge justified any cost. Understanding Batman, the greatest human achievement he'd ever encountered, was worth any number of casualties. Batman ensured Strange was kept in maximum security, restricted his access to other inmates, monitored his communications, but Strange was brilliant. Found ways around every restriction, influenced other inmates through intermediaries, conducted his experiments through proxies. And always he was watching Batman, studying him, adding to his understanding, building a profile that grew more complete with every encounter. Strange's files on Batman were thousands of pages long. Psychological analysis, physical assessments, tactical evaluations, predictions about how Batman would respond to various scenarios. He was right more often than he was wrong. That was the truly frightening thing. Strange understood Batman better than almost anyone, could predict his moves, anticipate his strategies. Not perfectly, but well enough to be dangerous. Bruce sometimes wondered if Strange was right, if he was an experiment, a specimen to be studied, if his entire crusade was just feeding Strange's research, giving him data, playing into whatever long-term study Strange was conducting. But what was the alternative? Stop being Batman? Let Gotham fall into chaos? That's probably what Strange wanted, to see how Bruce would react to that choice, to gather more data. So Bruce kept fighting, kept stopping crimes, kept sending villains to Arkham where Strange waited, watching, always watching, adding notes to his endless files, waiting for the next phase of his experiment to begin. Section 11. In 1996, writer Jeff Loeb and artist Tim Sale created what many consider the definitive Batman detective story. Published over 13 months from June 1996 to September 1997, The Long Halloween became a masterclass in mystery, atmosphere, and the gradual corruption of good people by the darkness they fight. The story begins on Halloween night. Johnny Vitti, nephew of Carmine Falcone, the most powerful crime boss in Gotham, is found dead in his apartment, shot twice in the head, a jack-o'-lantern left beside the body. The crime scene is professional, clean, no witnesses, no evidence beyond the pumpkin. Batman investigates alongside Jim Gordon and District Attorney Harvey Dent. The three of them have an alliance, an understanding. They're trying to bring down the Falcone family through legal means, build cases that will actually stick in court, do things the right way. Dent is their hope for that. Young, idealistic, incorruptible, he believes the system can work if good people refuse to compromise. Then Thanksgiving arrives. Another Falcone family member dead, shot the same way. A different holiday decoration left at the scene, a cornucopia. By Christmas, it's clear they're dealing with a serial killer, someone targeting the Falcone organization specifically, always on holidays, always with the same method, 2 shots to the head, always leaving a symbol of whatever holiday it is. The media names the killer holiday. Batman, Gordon and Dent are under immense pressure to solve the case. The mob war that follows each murder is tearing Gotham apart. Rival families sense Falcone's weakness, start making moves. The body count rises beyond Holiday's victims. What makes The Long Halloween brilliant is that it's not really about solving the murders, it's about watching Harvey Dent's transformation into Two-Face, watching Gotham shift from a city controlled by organized crime to a city terrorized by costumed freaks, watching Batman's methods fail despite his best efforts. Batman suspects everyone. The killer has access to Falcone's operations, knows schedules, knows where family members will be. The list of suspects is long. Alberto Falcone, Carmine's son, who feels overlooked by his father. Carla Vitti, Johnny's sister seeking revenge. Various members of the GCPD who might be cleaning up the mob for their own reasons. Even Dent himself falls under suspicion at times. His behavior becomes increasingly erratic as the case drags on. He's sleeping less, drinking more. His marriage to Gilda is suffering. The pressure of being Gotham's White Knight is crushing him. Each month brings another holiday, another murder, another escalation. Valentine's Day, St. Patrick's Day, April Fool's Day. The pattern is relentless, and despite Batman's detective skills, despite all his technology and training, he can't figure it out, can't predict where Holiday will strike next. Falcone, desperate and paranoid, makes deals with Gotham's emerging costumed criminals, hires Joker to find Holiday, brings in Scarecrow, Mad Hatter, Poison Ivy. The freaks start replacing the mobsters, the old Gotham dying as the new one is born in blood and madness. Batman finds himself caught between two worlds, the criminals he knows how to fight, the mobsters and organized crime, and the ones he doesn't, the psychologically disturbed individuals who don't follow normal criminal logic, who kill for reasons that have nothing to do with profit or power. Harvey Dent gets caught in that transition too. During a court case against the Falcones, Sal Maroni, a rival mob boss, throws acid in Harvey's face. The left side is destroyed, burned beyond recognition, and something breaks in Harvey's mind. The physical scarring mirrors psychological damage that was already forming, all those months of stress, of compromise. of watching good people die while bad people thrived. Harvey becomes Two-Face, obsessed with duality, with chance, with the idea that good and evil are equally probable outcomes in any situation. He makes decisions by flipping his lucky coin, scarred on one side, clean on the other. Lets fate decide rather than struggling with moral choices anymore. Batman loses his ally, his friend, the man he believed could save Gotham through the system. Watches him become another inmate at Arkham, another example of how this city breaks everyone eventually. And still Holiday continues killing, even with Harvey gone, even with the Falcone family in ruins. The murders don't stop. The truth, when it finally emerges, is more complicated than anyone expected. Alberto Falcone claims to be Holiday, confesses to all the murders. His motivation makes sense. He was overlooked by his father, treated as weak, wanted to destroy the family that never valued him. He's arrested. Seems like the case is closed. But Batman isn't satisfied. The evidence doesn't quite fit. Some of the murders show a different signature, different planning. Almost like there were two Holidays operating, maybe more. The real answer, never fully confirmed but heavily implied, is that Gilda Dent was the first Holiday, Harvey's wife. She killed the early victims trying to eliminate the criminals who were destroying her husband, trying to save him by removing the source of his stress and obsession. She stopped after a few murders, couldn't continue. Then Alberto started copying her. Took on the Holiday identity for his own reasons, completed what Gilda started, and Harvey himself, before his transformation, may have killed once or twice as well. The investigation consuming him so completely that he crossed lines he didn't even remember crossing. Multiple people wearing the same mask. Multiple killers with different motivations, all hiding behind one identity. The perfect crime not because it was unsolvable, but because the solution was too complicated, too messy, too many guilty parties. Batman closes the case with Alberto's confession, lets the complicated truth stay buried, because what good would it do to expose Gilda now, to add her to Arkham alongside her husband? Alberto is willing to take credit for everything, better to let him. But it haunts Batman. The realization that he couldn't solve it, that his detective skills weren't enough, that the truth was distributed across multiple people in ways that made it nearly impossible to piece together. He prided himself on being the world's greatest detective, and Holiday beat him. More than that, he'd failed Harvey, been so focused on solving the mystery that he didn't see his friend falling apart, didn't catch the warning signs, didn't realize how close Harvey was to breaking until acid destroyed his face and revealed the fracture underneath. The long Halloween ends with Gotham transformed. The old mob families are gone or weakened. The freaks have taken over. Arkham is full of new inmates, colorful criminals with psychological disorders and theatrical gimmicks. The city Batman knew is gone, replaced by something worse. And in that transition, 3 good people were destroyed. Harvey became Two-Face. Gilda became a killer protecting her husband. Gordon became more cynical, more willing to bend rules, more aware that the system he serves is fundamentally broken. Batman remained Batman. But something changed in him too. He'd entered this investigation believing justice was achievable, that truth could be found, that good people could win through determination and skill. He emerged knowing that sometimes there are no clean solutions. Sometimes the bad guys win even when they lose. Sometimes everyone is guilty. The case files sit in the Batcave. 13 months of investigation. Hundreds of witness interviews. Thousands of pieces of evidence. And at the end of it all, a solution that satisfied nobody, least of all Batman. He still doesn't know for certain who killed whom, which murders were Gilda, which were Alberto, whether Harvey participated or was just a victim. The truth scattered across multiple people like shrapnel from an explosion. Too many pieces. Too much damage. No way to make it whole again. Some nights, Batman pulls up those files, reviews them, looks for what he missed, where he could have done better, how he could have saved Harvey. The answers never come, just more questions, more doubt, more awareness of his own limitations. The long Halloween taught Batman that being the world's greatest detective doesn't mean you always solve the case. Sometimes it means learning to live with uncertainty, with partial answers, with knowing you failed even when you technically succeeded. It was the longest year of Batman's career, and its effects rippled forward through everything that came after. Every case, every villain, every moment of doubt. The memory of those 13 months when Gotham changed forever and Batman couldn't stop it. In 1996, writer Jeff Loeb and artist Tim Sale created what many consider the definitive Batman detective story. Published over 13 months from June 1996 to September 1997, The Long Halloween became a masterclass in mystery, atmosphere, and the gradual corruption of good people by the darkness they fight. The story begins on Halloween night. Johnny Vitti, nephew of Carmine Falcone, the most powerful crime boss in Gotham, is found dead in his apartment, shot twice in the head. A jack-o'-lantern left beside the body. The crime scene is professional, clean, no witnesses, no evidence beyond the pumpkin. Batman investigates alongside Jim Gordon and District Attorney Harvey Dent. The three of them have an alliance, an understanding. They're trying to bring down the Falcone family through legal means, build cases that will actually stick in court, do things the right way. Dent is their hope for that. Young, idealistic, incorruptible. He believes the system can work if good people refuse to compromise. Then Thanksgiving arrives. Another Falcone family member dead, shot the same way, a different holiday decoration left at the scene. A cornucopia. By Christmas, it's clear they're dealing with a serial killer. Someone targeting the Falcone organization specifically. Always on holidays. Always with the same method. 2 shots to the head. Always leaving a symbol of whatever holiday it is. The media names the killer holiday. Batman, Gordon, and Dent are under immense pressure to solve the case. The mob war that follows each murder is tearing Gotham apart. Rival families sense Falcone's weakness, start making moves. The body count rises beyond Holiday's victims. What makes The Long Halloween brilliant is that it's not really about solving the murders. It's about watching Harvey Dent's transformation into Two-Face, watching Gotham shift from a city controlled by organized crime to a city terrorized by costumed freaks, watching Batman's methods fail despite his best efforts. Batman suspects everyone. The killer has access to Falcone's operations, knows schedules, knows where family members will be. The list of suspects is long. Alberto Falcone, Carmine's son, who feels overlooked by his father. Carla Vitti, Johnny's sister seeking revenge. Various members of the GCPD, who might be cleaning up the mob for their own reasons. Even Dent himself falls under suspicion at times. His behavior becomes increasingly erratic as the case drags on. He's sleeping less, drinking more. His marriage to Gilda is suffering. The pressure of being Gotham's White Knight is crushing him. Each month brings another holiday, another murder, another escalation. Valentine's Day, St. Patrick's Day, April Fool's Day. The pattern is relentless. And despite Batman's detective skills, despite all his technology and training, he can't figure it out. Can't predict where Holiday will strike next. Falcone, desperate and paranoid, makes deals with Gotham's emerging costumed criminals. Hires Joker to find Holiday, brings in Scarecrow, Mad Hatter, Poison Ivy. The freaks start replacing the mobsters, the old Gotham dying as the new one is born in blood and madness. Batman finds himself caught between two worlds. The criminals he knows how to fight, the mobsters and organized crime, and the ones he doesn't. The psychologically disturbed individuals who don't follow normal criminal logic, who kill for reasons that have nothing to do with profit or power. Harvey Dent gets caught in that transition too. During a court case against the Falcones, Sal Maroni, a rival mob boss, throws acid in Harvey's face. The left side is destroyed, burned beyond recognition, and something breaks in Harvey's mind. The physical scarring mirrors psychological damage that was already forming. All those months of stress, of compromise, of watching good people die while bad people thrived. Harvey becomes Two-Face, obsessed with duality, with chance, with the idea that good and evil are equally probable outcomes in any situation. He makes decisions by flipping his lucky coin. Scarred on one side, clean on the other. Lets fate decide rather than struggling with moral choices anymore. Batman loses his ally. His friend, the man he believed could save Gotham through the system, watches him become another inmate at Arkham. Another example of how this city breaks everyone eventually. And still Holiday continues killing. Even with Harvey gone, even with the Falcone family in ruins, the murders don't stop. The truth, when it finally emerges, is more complicated than anyone expected. Alberto Falcone claims to be Holiday, confesses to all the murders. His motivation makes sense. He was overlooked by his father, treated as weak, wanted to destroy the family that never valued him. He's arrested, seems like the case is closed. But Batman isn't satisfied. The evidence doesn't quite fit. Some of the murders show a different signature. Different planning, almost like there were two Holidays operating, maybe more. The real answer, never fully confirmed but heavily implied, is that Gilda Dent was the first Holiday, Harvey's wife. She killed the early victims trying to eliminate the criminals who were destroying her husband, trying to save him by removing the source of his stress and obsession. She stopped after a few murders, couldn't continue. Then, Alberto started copying her, took on the Holiday identity for his own reasons, completed what Gilda started, and Harvey himself, before his transformation, may have killed once or twice as well. The investigation consuming him so completely that he crossed lines he didn't even remember crossing. Multiple people wearing the same mask, multiple killers with different motivations, all hiding behind one identity. The perfect crime, not because it was unsolvable, but because the solution was too complicated, too messy, too many guilty parties. Batman closes the case with Alberto's confession, lets the complicated truth stay buried, because what good would it do to expose Gilda now, to add her to Arkham alongside her husband? Alberto is willing to take credit for everything, better to let him. But it haunts Batman. The realization that he couldn't solve it, that his detective skills weren't enough, that the truth was distributed across multiple people in ways that made it nearly impossible to piece together. He prided himself on being the world's greatest detective, and Holiday beat him. More than that, he'd failed Harvey. Been so focused on solving the mystery that he didn't see his friend falling apart, didn't catch the warning signs, didn't realize how close Harvey was to breaking until acid destroyed his face and revealed the fracture underneath. The long Halloween ends with Gotham transformed. The old mob families are gone or weakened. The freaks have taken over. Arkham is full of new inmates, colorful criminals with psychological disorders and theatrical gimmicks. The city Batman knew is gone, replaced by something worse. And in that transition, 3 good people were destroyed. Harvey became Two-Face. Gilda became a killer protecting her husband. Gordon became more cynical, more willing to bend rules, more aware that the system he serves is fundamentally broken. Batman remained Batman, but something changed in him too. He'd entered this investigation believing justice was achievable, that truth could be found, that good people could win through determination and skill. He emerged knowing that sometimes there are no clean solutions. Sometimes the bad guys win even when they lose. Sometimes everyone is guilty. The case files sit in the Batcave. 13 months of investigation, hundreds of witness interviews, thousands of pieces of evidence, and at the end of it all, a solution that satisfied nobody, least of all Batman. He still doesn't know for certain who killed whom, which murders were Gilda, which were Alberto, Whether Harvey participated, or was just a victim, the truth scattered across multiple people like shrapnel from an explosion. Too many pieces. Too much damage. No way to make it whole again. Some nights, Batman pulls up those files, reviews them, looks for what he missed, where he could have done better, how he could have saved Harvey. The answers never come. Just more questions, more doubt, more awareness of his own limitations. The long Halloween taught Batman that being the world's greatest detective doesn't mean you always solve the case. Sometimes it means learning to live with uncertainty, with partial answers, with knowing you failed even when you technically succeeded. It was the longest year of Batman's career, and its effects rippled forward through everything that came after. Every case, every villain, every moment of doubt. The memory of those 13 months when Gotham changed forever, and Batman couldn't stop it. Bruce Wayne sits in the Batcave as dawn breaks over Gotham. The monitors glow softly in the darkness. Case files are spread across the desk. Blackfire, Wesker, Pig, Tetch, Zsasz, Strange, Holiday. 7 cases that represent hundreds of victims, thousands of hours of investigation, decades of fighting a war that never seems to end. Alfred descends the stairs carrying a tray. Hot coffee, toast. The butler's silent insistence that Bruce take care of himself even when he doesn't want to. Alfred sets the tray down and stands beside the chair, doesn't speak, just waits. Bruce finally looks up from the screens. His eyes are tired, not just from lack of sleep, though that's part of it. It's a deeper exhaustion, the kind that comes from carrying weight for too long without ever being able to set it down. He tells Alfred about his realizations over the past few weeks, how every case revealed something about Gotham's sickness, how the patterns connect, how Arkham Asylum isn't healing anyone, how the system he's been supporting might be part of the problem, how his war on crime might be feeding the very cycle he's trying to break. Alfred listens, has heard variations of this crisis before. Bruce goes through phases where he questions everything, usually triggered by a particularly difficult case or a failure that hits too close to home. The butler lets him talk, knows that sometimes Bruce just needs to voice these doubts aloud to work through them. When Bruce finishes, Alfred asks a simple question: what's the alternative? Bruce doesn't have an answer. That's the problem. He can see what's broken but not how to fix it, can diagnose Gotham's illness but can't cure it, and stopping his crusade would only make things worse. The criminals would still exist. The victims would still suffer. At least Batman provides some measure of protection, some deterrent, some hope. But is hope enough when the underlying problems never change? Alfred suggests that maybe expecting to fix Gotham completely is the wrong goal. Maybe the purpose isn't to cure the city, but to prevent it from getting worse. To be the resistance against total collapse. Not a savior, but a guardian. Someone who stands in the gap, even when victory seems impossible. Bruce considers this. It's a smaller ambition than what he started with. 20 years ago he believed he could eliminate crime in Gotham, make the city safe, honor his parents' memory by ensuring no other child would watch their parents die in an alley. That idealism seems naive now, childish even. But Alfred's reframing offers something else. Purpose without the requirement of success. Meaning in the struggle itself rather than in some distant victory that might never come. The cases he's reviewed aren't stories of triumph. They're stories of limitation, of doing what he could with the tools available and accepting that it wasn't enough, couldn't ever be enough. Not because he failed, but because the problems were bigger than any one person could solve. Blackfire broke him, showed that even Batman's mind could be compromised, that willpower alone wasn't sufficient armor against psychological warfare. He survived, recovered, but the scars remained. The knowledge that he was vulnerable in ways he'd never fully acknowledged. Wesker was trapped in his own mind. No amount of intervention could free him from Scarface. The disorder was too deep, too fundamental to who Arnold was. Batman could keep him contained but not cured, could prevent him from hurting others, but not from hurting himself. Pig's victims were gone. Not dead, but erased, their personalities destroyed by surgery and chemicals. They'd never be who they were before. Batman had saved 17 people from the operating table that night, but he couldn't save the 17 who'd already been transformed, couldn't undo what had been done. Tetch's Alice's carried trauma that would last lifetimes. The violation of having your will stolen, your body puppeted, your sense of self temporarily erased. No amount of therapy would fully heal that. No justice would feel adequate. Batman could stop Tetch, but not repair what he'd broken. Zsasz represented a philosophical wall Batman couldn't scale, a worldview so fundamentally different that communication became impossible. How do you reason with someone who doesn't accept the basic premise that life has value? How do you rehabilitate someone who sees murder as mercy? You can't. You can only contain them and hope the containment holds. Strange understood Batman better than Batman sometimes understood himself, studied him, dissected him, turned him into an experiment. And there was nothing Batman could do about that, except keep fighting, keep being observed, keep generating data for Strange's endless research. Because the alternative was to stop being Batman, and that would mean Strange won completely. Holiday remained unsolved. Not officially, but in truth. Multiple killers hiding behind one identity, each with their own reasons, their own guilt, and Batman never quite piecing it together. His greatest detective failure, the case that showed him that some mysteries don't have clean solutions, that sometimes truth is messy and distributed and impossible to fully untangle. 7 cases. 7 different kinds of failure. 7 reminders that Batman, for all his skills and resources and determination, is still just one man fighting problems that require systemic solutions he can't provide. But he's still fighting. That has to count for something. Bruce stands up from the computer, accepts the coffee from Alfred, drinks it while watching the sun rise on the monitors. Gotham waking up to another day. People going to work. Children heading to school. Life continuing despite everything. Maybe that's the real victory. Not defeating evil permanently, but holding it back long enough for normal life to happen. Creating space for ordinary goodness to exist. It's not the heroic narrative he imagined when he first put on the cape. Not the epic struggle between light and darkness with a clear winner. It's messier than that. More ambiguous. But maybe more honest too. Batman can't cure Arkham's patients, can't reform the Asylum, can't stop every murder or prevent every tragedy. But he can respond when Gordon lights the signal, can investigate when people disappear, can stand between victims and monsters when seconds matter, can be the presence in the dark that makes criminals hesitate. Alfred reminds him that small victories still matter, that every person saved counts, that preventing Gotham from falling completely into chaos is itself an achievement even if it doesn't feel heroic. Bruce nods, finishes his coffee. The exhaustion is still there, but it's manageable now, contextualized. He's not a savior who failed, he's a guardian who persists. The distinction matters. He closes the case files. Each one represents horror and limitation and hard truths about what he can and can't accomplish. But each one also represents people who were helped, victims who were rescued, criminals who were stopped, even temporarily. The work wasn't perfect, but it was something, and something is better than nothing. Gotham will never be fully healed. The criminals will keep escaping Arkham. The system will keep failing. New victims will emerge. New monsters will rise, and Batman will keep fighting them. Not because he believes he'll eventually win, but because someone has to stand in opposition. Someone has to say that this darkness isn't acceptable, that victims matter, that evil should be resisted even when it can't be eliminated. That's what these stories teach. Not that Batman is invincible, or that justice always prevails, but that the fight itself has value. that persistence in the face of impossible odds is its own form of heroism, that protecting people, even imperfectly, even temporarily, is worthwhile. Bruce Wayne will sleep for a few hours, then he'll wake and be Bruce Wayne for a while, handle Wayne Enterprises business, maintain the facade, and when night falls he'll become Batman again. Return to the streets, respond to crimes, face new horrors, because that's what he does, what he'll always do. The cases we've explored tonight aren't exceptional, they're representative. This is what Batman faces constantly: psychological horror, broken systems, unfixable people, impossible choices, and he keeps going anyway. That's the real story, not the victories, but the persistence, the refusal to give up even when giving up would be rational. Gotham sleeps under Batman's protection, not perfect protection, not complete security, but someone watching, someone ready to respond, someone who's seen the worst humanity offers and still believes in fighting for the best. These dark stories deserve to be told, not because they're pleasant, but because they're true, because they show Batman's real heroism, not in defeating villains spectacularly, but in facing horror repeatedly without breaking, in carrying weight that would crush most people and still showing up the next night, in accepting that he can't save everyone but trying anyway. The sun is fully up now. Gotham begins another day, and somewhere in the manor above the cave, Batman finally rests. Tomorrow night he'll rise again, face new darkness, save who he can, mourn who he can't, and continue the endless vigil. Because someone has to. And Batman chose to be that someone. These stories are his burden, and he carries them so others don't have to.